Eli Turner had never believed in luck. He worked hard for everything he owned, from the small herd of cattle grazing behind his fence to the worn-out truck parked beside his barn. He had lived most of his 60 years under the wide Arizona sky, alone on dry land that gave little but took plenty. So when he saw the old auction notice at the county office saying a forgotten piece of land could be bought for 20 cents, he thought it was some kind of joke. The woman behind the desk told him the land had been listed for decades. No one wanted it. Too rocky for crops, too dry for water. But something in Eli's stubborn heart said he should see it. 20 cents wasn't much. It was less than the cost of a nail, less than a mouthful of coffee. So he paid. The woman smiled like she thought he was wasting his time, but Eli didn't care. He liked lost things. The next morning, he loaded his horse trailer and rode out to find the land. The road wound past dry riverbeds and lonely hills where the wind sounded like whispers. The sun was bright but cold that morning, shining on empty country. When he reached the place, he almost missed it. The cabin sat half hidden behind a cluster of juniper trees, small and gray like it had grown out of the ground itself. The roof had holes, and part of the wall leaned to one side. The front door hung open, creaking back and forth with every gust. Eli stepped down from his horse and took a long breath. The air was still but not quiet. There was a kind of hush that felt alive, like someone was listening. He walked up to the porch. The wood creaked under his boots. He noticed a rusted chain hanging from one of the beams. It swung slowly, tapping the wood with a soft sound. The metal was dark with age, maybe left from a broken lantern or a hanging plant long ago. He pushed open the door. Dust filled the air like smoke, and sunlight fell through cracks in the roof. The room smelled of old wood, ash, and dry earth. Inside, everything looked abandoned for a lifetime. A broken chair lay on its side near the hearth. The table had one leg missing. The floorboards were covered in sand blown in from the desert. Still, Eli felt something familiar there, something old but not forgotten. He ran his hand across the rough wall and found carvings burned into the beams, shapes like spirals, lines, and open hands. He couldn't tell what they meant, but they were careful marks made by someone who cared about them. He stepped farther inside. There were 2 rooms. The second one had no windows. It was darker, colder, and carried a faint smell of smoke. The moment he entered, something in the air changed. He felt it before he saw it. His breath caught as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. There, from the center beam, hung a figure. For a moment, Eli's body went rigid. The sight didn't feel real at first. The figure wasn't moving. It looked tall, too tall to be anyone from around town. The shape was slender still, wrapped in what looked like old cloth and beads that shimmered faintly in the low light. Eli stepped closer without meaning to. The face was dry, the skin darkened by years but still soft enough to show a calm expression. It wasn't horror or pain he saw, it was peace. He froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He whispered something under his breath, though he didn't know if it was a prayer or an apology. The woman looked to be young once, maybe 20 or 30 when she passed. Around her neck hung a turquoise pendant in a silver setting, still shining faintly as if it had held its color through time. Her hair was long and black, braided with small shells and colored beads. Eli didn't know what to do. The desert was quiet outside, but the silence inside the cabin felt deeper, heavier. He slowly reached up and touched the pendant. It was cold. Then he noticed her clothes, handmade with careful stitching and patterns he had seen before only in museums or history books. Apache work. He stepped back and sat down on the dusty floor. The air felt heavy with stories he couldn't understand. After a long time, he stood and went outside to breathe. The sun had shifted, casting long orange shadows across the land. He looked out at the empty horizon and tried to understand how such a place could hold something so sad, so forgotten. He thought about leaving her there and walking away, pretending none of it had happened, but he couldn't. He went back inside, took his jacket off, and gently lifted the figure down. It was lighter than he expected, like holding dry grass. He wrapped her carefully, whispering that he meant no harm. The sound of his own voice was strange in the silence. When he placed her on the ground, a gust of wind blew through the broken doorway, stirring the dust into a swirl of gold light. Eli stood for a long time, looking down at her. There was no fear anymore, only a strange calm. It felt as if she had been waiting for someone. And somehow, after all these years, he had been the one to come. He buried her under a tree near the cabin, where the land curved gently toward the canyon. He didn't mark the grave with stones or a sign. He just stood there with his hat in his hands and said softly, "Rest now." That night, back at his ranch, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face again. Not frightening, just there, like she was watching over something. He made coffee in the dark and sat by the window. The wind outside sounded like faint singing. Over the next few days, he told a few people in town what he had found. Most didn't believe him. A few said he should have left the cabin alone. One old man at the feed store said the place was cursed land, that it used to belong to the Apache before soldiers took it. Eli didn't argue. He just nodded. But when he went home that night, he took out the turquoise pendant he had found and turned it over in his hand. On the back was a small mark, 3 curved lines meeting at the center like a symbol of the sun. He didn't know what it meant, but he couldn't forget it. He started asking questions. He rode out to the reservation a few miles away, spoke to elders who still remembered old stories. Most were polite but quiet. They said the land around that cabin had once been sacred, that women used to gather there for ceremonies long before settlers came. One woman told him there had been a young woman who disappeared during the raids, a daughter of a chief. No one ever found her. Eli listened, said thank you, and rode back home. That night he stood outside and looked toward the distant hills where the cabin stood. The stars above seemed brighter there. The desert was still calm, almost kind. For the first time in a long while, Eli felt like he wasn't alone on his land. He knew he couldn't just forget her story. There was something about the way she had been left, the way her presence still filled that cabin, that made him feel responsible. Maybe it was because he had bought that land, even for only 20 cents. Maybe because he was the only one who cared enough to go there. He promised himself he would find out who she was. He didn't want to make the story bigger or turn it into legend. He just wanted to know her name. As he stood in the cold desert wind, the pendant still warm in his hand, he felt a strange peace. Somewhere out there, in that silent land, he knew the woman's story wasn't finished yet. And maybe, in some quiet way, it had chosen him to tell it. Eli Turner woke before sunrise, the pale light spreading softly across the ranch. The air smelled of dust and morning coffee. He had dreamed again of the cabin, of the tall woman standing by the door, her long hair moving in the wind though the world around her was still. When he opened his eyes, the dream stayed in his mind like it wanted to tell him something he hadn't yet understood. He knew he couldn't rest until he found out who she was. The 20 cents he had spent on that land had turned into something more, a quiet promise. So he packed a small bag, took the turquoise pendant, and set out toward the reservation again. The road was empty, the sky a pale gold. He stopped by the small trading post near the edge of town, where an old woman named Naomi Greyhawk kept a shop filled with handmade blankets, pottery, and photographs of the past. Naomi had seen many things in her life. She looked at Eli's weathered face and nodded before he said a word. He told her about the cabin, the carvings, the pendant, and the woman he had found. For a while, Naomi said nothing. Then she took the pendant gently, turning it over in her palm. Her eyes softened, and she touched the small symbol on the back. "This was made by our people," she said quietly, "long ago. The mark is the sign of the Rain family. It belonged to a girl called Tessa Rain." Eli felt a strange weight lift and settle again. He asked who she was. Naomi told him a story that seemed older than the hills around them. Tessa Rain had been the daughter of a respected leader, known for her tall height, her calm strength, and her kindness to children and animals. She was said to have spoken several languages and often helped translate between her people and the settlers. But one year, when she was still young, she disappeared after a time of conflict. Some said she was taken away. Some said she left to protect her family. No one ever saw her again. Naomi held the pendant a little longer before handing it back. "The land where you found her," she said softly, "was once her father's home. Many hearts broke when she vanished." Eli felt quiet inside. The story fit too well to be a coincidence. He thanked Naomi and asked if she would come see the place with him. She hesitated, then agreed. "We must bring peace to her spirit," she said. They set out the next morning. The ride was long and silent except for the sound of the wind. When they reached the old cabin, the sky was pale blue, and the land around it seemed even quieter than before. Naomi stood in front of the broken porch for a long moment, her hands clasped together, her eyes wet with memory. She began to hum a low, soft tune that rose and fell like the wind through grass. Eli stood still listening. The sound filled the air like prayer. They went inside together. The dust had settled and sunlight touched the wooden floor in bright shapes. Eli showed her the carvings on the beams. Naomi traced them gently with her fingers. These were made for blessings, she said, for protection and strength. She knelt near the place where Eli had found the woman and began to speak in her language, words that sounded like song. Eli didn't understand, but the tone made him feel calm, as if something heavy was finally being lifted. They decided to bury her properly near the Red Canyon a few miles away, where the ground was soft and the air carried the scent of sage. As they dug, Naomi told him about the old days when the land was shared and people lived close to nature. She said that when people were lost or forgotten, their spirits sometimes stayed until someone remembered them again. Eli listened quietly. When the grave was ready, Naomi laid a small bundle of sage and corn beside it. Eli placed the pendant on top, but Naomi shook her head gently. "You keep it," she said. "It found you for a reason," Eli nodded. They covered the grave and stood side by side in silence. The sky turned orange as the sun lowered, painting the canyon walls with gold. Then Naomi asked him to walk back with her to the cabin once more before they left. As they entered, something caught Eli's eye near the old hearth. A corner of metal was sticking out from under a cracked floorboard. He knelt, pulled it loose, and found a small tin box, rusted but still closed. Inside were brittle papers and a faded photograph. The papers were land records written by hand, dated in the 1870s, showing a transfer of the very land he had bought for 20 cents. But the photograph was what made him stop. It showed a young woman standing beside a few men in worn uniforms. Her expression was proud, not afraid. Around her neck was the same turquoise pendant. Her height made her stand out. There was no doubt in Eli's mind. It was her. Tessa Rain. Naomi took the photo in her hands and whispered something under her breath. Then she looked at him with eyes full of quiet sadness. "Now we know," she said. "Her land was taken and her name was hidden. That's why her spirit stayed." Eli's throat felt tight. He realized that the 20 cents he had paid wasn't a deal at all. It was a kind of return, a payment long overdue. He sat down and looked around the small room that had once been her home. He could almost see her sitting by the fire, smiling, alive in a world that had since forgotten her. Naomi touched the wall gently, tracing the carvings again. "Sometimes the land remembers what people forget," she said. They decided to let the cabin go back to the earth. Eli gathered dry wood and placed it inside carefully. When he lit it, the fire rose slow and calm, glowing against the sky. There was no fear in it, only peace. Naomi sang softly as the smoke lifted, her voice carrying through the open land. Eli stood beside her until the last light faded. When the fire turned to ash, Naomi placed her hand on his shoulder. "She's free now," she said. They rode home under the stars, the desert quiet and full of silver light. Eli didn't speak much. He kept thinking about the photograph, about the calm face of the woman who had waited so long for someone to see her again. Back at his ranch, he placed the pendant on the mantel beside his old coffee cup. Every morning after that, he would see it catching the sunrise, glowing faintly blue-green like the color of rain. It became a reminder of a promise, of a name, of a truth returned to the land. He never tried to sell that property again. He let the grass grow wild and the trees reclaim the soil. When travelers passed by and asked about the burned place near the canyon, he only said, "It belonged to someone before me." Years later, people still told stories of that land. Some said at dusk they saw a tall woman walking by the ashes of an old cabin, her hair moving gently in the wind. She never spoke, never scared anyone. She only looked out over the valley as if keeping watch over the land that had finally been made hers again. Eli lived out his days quietly, growing older, his hands still strong and his eyes softer than before. On clear nights, he would sit outside with his hat on his knee, watching the stars appear one by one. He often thought of Naomi's words, that sometimes the land remembers what people forget. He hoped the land would remember her too. When he passed away many years later, his neighbors found the pendant still resting by his window, shining softly in the morning sun. They buried it with him, because no one knew where else it belonged. To this day, when the desert wind moves through the juniper trees, some say it carries a sound like a soft voice humming. Maybe it's the wind, maybe it's something else. But those who have heard it say it feels kind, like someone finally at peace.